Hey class, and welcome to lesson 1.8, Relate Multiplication to Division. Let's begin by taking a look at our essential question. How is multiplication used to solve a division problem? Well, let's get an understanding of this. You can use the relationship between multiplication and division to solve a division problem. Using the same numbers, multiplication and division are opposite or inverse operations. This inverse operation term is going to be very important. So let's take a look at an example. We have 3 times 8 equals 24. 3 is a factor, 8 is a factor, and 24 is a product. Now, if we look at that in the inverse operation or using division, we see that the product we have over here then becomes the dividend. Our 3, which is a factor over here, becomes the divisor. And our 8, which is a factor over here, then becomes the quotient. So let's begin by taking a look at our Unlock the Problem. Joel and 5 friends collected 126 marbles. They shared the marbles equally. How many marbles will each person get? Well, first thing we have to do is figure out how many people we're talking about. So let's go back and take a look. It says Joel and. Remember that and typically means to add. So the very first thing we're going to have to do is Joel's going to be a person, and then he has 5 friends. So we need to add those two numbers together to get 6 people. Now, what did those 6 people do? Those 6 people collected 126 marbles. Then, what did they do after they collected the marbles? They shared the marbles equally, which means that you have 1 friend, 2 friend, 3 friend, 4 friend, 5 friend, and 6 friends, and they each got the same number of marbles. So when we start with a big number and we're giving some to each person, that typically means, which is what equally, division. So one way that we can solve this problem is to outline a rectangular array on the grid to model 126 squares arranged in 6 rows of the same length. And we're going to shade each row a different color. So we will begin with each friend. So we have Joel, and we have 5 friends. Friend 2, friend 3, friend 4, and friend 5. So we have to give each one of them the same number of marbles. So how can we do that? We have our grid here. So let's think. If we have 126 marbles and we have 6 friends, we know that 1 cannot be divided by 6. So let's look at 12. And that is 2 times. And 2 times 6 is 12. 12 minus 12 is 0. Bring down our 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1. 1 times 6 is 6. 6 minus 6 is 0. So that we know that each one is going to get 21 marbles. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So we can shade this area blue for Joel. And then we know that friend 1 is going to get 21 marbles, so we will shade this one green. We know that friend 2 is going to get 21 marbles, so we will shade it yellow. We know that friend 3 is going to get 21 marbles, so we will shade that red. And we're going to have to go back to the same color for friend 4. It's also going to get 21 marbles. And back to green for friend 5 to have 21 marbles. So now we have our array. So how many squares are shaded in each row? and we see that there are 21 squares shaded in each row. So it says then to use the array to complete the multiplication sentence. Then use the multiplication sentence to complete the division sentence. Well, we see that 6, because there's 6 people, times our 21 in each row equals 126. Now we're going to use the inverse operation, and the inverse of multiplication is division. And you see that our product of our multiplication problem then becomes our dividend for our division problem. We see that our known factor of 6 then becomes our divisor in our division problem. So the only number that we have left is our other factor, and that is our quotient then will be 21. So each of the 6 friends will get 21 marbles. Now, let's take a look at another way that we can solve this. You can use the distributive property and an area model to solve division problems. Remember that the distributive property states that multiplying a sum by a number is the same as multiplying each addend in the sum by the number and then adding the products. So, let's begin with step 1. It says to write a related multiplication sentence for the division problems. So let's think to ourselves. Use the division as a factor and the dividend as the product. The quotient will be the unknown factor. So we start with our dividend of 52 divided by our divisor of 4 equals what? We know that the opposite or the inverse operation for division is multiplication. So then our divisor becomes one of our factors, our dividend becomes our product, and we're looking for our other factor. So if we have 52 divided by 4, we know that 4 times something equals 52. So let's take a look at step 2. It says to use the distributive property to break apart the large area into smaller areas for partial products that you know. So we know that we can divide 52 into 40 and 12, because if we take 40 and 12 and add them together, we will get 52. We can also use 4, and we're breaking these up here, our unknown factor, apart. So, what times 4 equals 40? Well, let's think. 40 divided by 4 equals, we know that one. That's an easy one for us. We know that that is 10. And then, what 12 divided by 4 equals, and that's going to be our 3 for this one. And we know that 4 times 3 equals 12. So you see that we've used the distributive property to come up with factors that we know. So step 3 says, find the sum of the unknown factors of the smaller areas. So we know that if we add this factor and this factor together, so let's take our 10 plus our other factor is 3, that's going to equal 13. So step 4 says to write the multiplication sentence with the unknown factor that you found. Then use the multiplication sentence to find the quotient. Well, the factor that we found was 13. So we know that 4 times 13 equals 52. And then if we take our divisor, or I'm sorry, our product and make it our dividend, our factor and make it our divisor, we then know, using all the same numbers, that 52 divided by 4 then has to equal 13. Now, it says to explain how you use the distributive property to find the quotient of 96 divided by 8. Well, we know that we can write the related multiplication sentence of 8 times something equals 96. Then we can use the distributive property to break apart the product. The product is the answer to a multiplication. So if we do that, we know that 96 equals 80 plus 16. Right? So now we're going to break apart the 80 and the 16. We know that if we break apart 80 and 16 using our distributive property, remember that is where we have two sets of parentheses and addition in between. We know that two factors that equal 80 is 80 times 10. And using our 8, because we have to distribute it to both, we know that 8 times 2 equals 16. So now we know that our missing factor is going to be 12, because if we take this unknown factor and this unknown factor and add them together, that's going to equal 12. So 96 divided by 8 equals 12, or using the inverse operation, we know that 12 times 8 equals 96. Alright guys, there's not going to be any notes for tonight. However, make sure you record the password of notebook for today's lesson, and I will see you in class tomorrow. Have a good evening.